All right, Larry Krueger here from the Pig and a Pickle Krug Show with a little 49er video on Darrell Luter Jr. headed to the PUP List. We'll talk about that in just a second. Make sure you check out Pig and a Pickle. 2 locations, Emeryville and Corte Madera, and they're open from 11 a.m. to 8 p.m. 7 days a week, now in both locations or until they run out. And that's the key phrase. Pig and a Pickle, the best barbecue in Northern California. Get the brisket chili. 2 locations, Emeryville and Corte Madera. All right, let's talk a little bit about the 49ers. Interesting day today because today was the day that rookies reported to training camp ahead of the veterans. The veterans will report next week, and training camp is just around the corner. But according to the NFL Transaction Wire, the 49ers placed the rookie corner Darrell Luter Jr. on the PUP list ahead of training camp. And there's been no specific word from the 49ers as to why Luter Jr. is on the PUP list. When you're placed on the PUP list, it's because you suffered a non-football injury. And unfortunately for the 49ers, this is not the first time that they would start camp off with a player on the PUP list. The good news for Luter Jr. is he can be activated from the list at any time. And so what does that mean? It means it's good news for Ambry Thomas. It's good news for Deshaun Jameson. Those guys have a much better chance of making the roster if you thin the herd a little bit at cornerback. But Luter Jr. is an interesting talent. Really solid player. I talked to him during minicamp. Very mature guy. He's married with a daughter. He played press man coverage almost exclusively at South Alabama. Even when they played zone on the opposite side of the field, Luter was locked up in press man. And I asked him, between zone coverage or off coverage or press man, up on the line of scrimmage, do you feel most comfortable? He said, I feel most comfortable in press man. So I kind of looked at the Luter draft choice as an indication that Steve Wilks may want to play more man-to-man coverage this year. And we'll see. We'll see, when Luter Jr. can get back on the field. He was their 5th-round draft choice, and they put him on the PUP list. And PUP stands for physically unable to perform. As I said, they haven't disclosed the injury. We don't know what the injury is. Obviously he's going to try to work on his conditioning. And now his NFL path has been delayed, at least for the foreseeable future. He's a 23-year-old corner with really long arms who tallied 5 picks, 91 total tackles, and 18 passes defensed in 3 seasons at South Alabama. So, we won't see the veterans report until next Tuesday, July the 25th. So, we're the rookies report ahead of time. And there's a lot of questions as far as, the Niner roster and especially on the defensive side of the ball. But I look at Luter as a guy with a really high ceiling and a guy who I think is going to have a great chance to have an excellent NFL career. Now, I don't know what this injury is, so I don't know exactly what he's battling back from, so it's impossible to really put any kind of timeline on it. But, you look at the 49ers in the secondary. They brought in Steve Wilks. Why? Well, D'Amico left to be the head coach of the Houston Texans. The Niners wanted to keep the continuity that they have on the defense with the front, so they decided to stay with their wide 9. They like Chris Kocherik. They like what he does on the defensive line. They like the production that they've gotten, and they like their scheme. So they didn't want to switch. There was a lot of talk about Vic Fangio, but Vic Fangio was going to come in and make them switch probably to a 3-4. Most teams are playing a hybrid anyway these days, but the Niners like their front. They like their wide 9 front, and a lot of that personnel that they have on their defensive line is directly tied to the wide 9. So, you look at Javon Hargrave. What's Hargrave? He's a one-gap penetrator who's been an excellent pass rusher since his days at South Carolina State. What's Kevin Givens? Kevin Givens is an undersized one-gap penetrator. What's Kalia Davis? He's a 315-pound one-gap penetrator. T.Y. McGill, one-gap penetrator. That's what these guys are. And that's what the wide 9, that's what you're looking for in the wide 9. You're trying to get up the field. You're trying to get after the quarterback. You want interior rushers who can, play one gap and penetrate into the backfield and get heat on the quarterback. You want defensive ends who are not dropping into coverage, that are peeling their ears back and hunting the quarterback. They're setting the edge against the run, but everything's about getting up the field and getting after the quarterback. In a 34 front, in a 3-4 defense, a lot of 3-4 defenses, it's more of a read and react mindset on the front. And you need guys who are two gappers, guys who can play, like a DJ Jones. You saw where'd Vic Fangio wind up? He wound up in Miami. Who does Miami have on their defensive line? They got big Christian Wilkins. So he's a two gap penetrate. He's a two gap guy who can play head over a head and take, basically defend two gaps at once. And that's what you want from your down three linemen in a 34 front. You want that nose guard to be 330 pounds and just engulf both A gaps. And then you want your defensive ends to basically be able to play head up on a guy and control either gap. So you need them to be big-bodied guys who are 280 and shoot gaps like Kevin Givens. They don't fit a 34 front. So I'm sure the Niners looked at their defense and said, you know what? We want to go with what we have. We want a little continuity. We got guys that we like our scheme, that fit our scheme. We've got the kinds of players that fit our wide nine, get up the field front. And so they didn't want to switch it up. But Wilkes has been brought in, I think, to really charge up the secondary. And you could just see by the conversations that some of the players had with us after the OTAs that Diamador Lenore was being very critical of his play. And when I asked Steve Wilkes, hey, what are we going to see differently between last year and this year? And he's like, hey, we've got to take the ball away more, and we got to defend the ball down the field with greater poise. And he's looking for more turnovers. Wilkes likes to play a lot of cover 3 zone, but he also will mix in some man coverages, and he typically will blitz his linebackers at a higher rate than what D'Amico did, at least in his years here as the defensive coordinator. So how does that all impact Luter? Well, Luter, the Niners, you want to have at least 5 good corners, and there's probably going to be 5 corners at least that make your roster, maybe 6, but definitely you want to have 5 good ones. And when you run out of corners, you run out of the ability to slow another team's passing game. So depth on the corners key more now than ever. It used to be, your 2 starting corners, and then your 3rd corner played quite a bit. And corner number 4 and corner number 5, those guys barely ever played. They were there for injuries. They were there for depth. But in today's game, where you see 3 wide receivers a lot, you see 4 wide receivers at times. Teams will say, hey, you know what? We think our 4th wide receiver is better than your 4th corner. And we think our 5th wide receiver is better than your 5th corner. And they'll test you, and they'll test the quality of your depth. And so now you need corners that not are just on the roster, but can actually play on the back end. So how does the Niner corner situation look currently? Well, you got Mooney Ward, and you paid him significantly to be, your starter, your number 1 corner. He's going to draw the top assignments. Then you got Diamador Lenore. He was probably going to play left corner opposite Mooney Ward as the starter. Then the Niners signed Isaiah Oliver, who's coming off a phenomenal year as a slot corner with the Atlanta Falcons, and they want him to play that nickel corner spot, play the slot, and I think those are your 3 starters: Lenore, Mooney Ward, and Isaiah Oliver. Okay, so those are your starters. So who are the backups? Those are your top 3 guys. Who's corner 4, 5, and 6? Well, I think corner 4 is probably going to be Samuel Womack, the second-year player out of Toledo. Womack looked incredible in the OTAs and the minicamp, moving around exceptionally well. He looked faster than he looked last year. He was flying all over the field. I mean, Samuel Womack looks primed to have a terrific year. Then the other surprise, I thought, of the offseason thus far has been the performance of Deshaun Jameson. Deshaun Jameson played at Texas, and he's not the biggest corner you're going to see. He's 5'9", about 185 pounds, but this guy can play coverage. He plays bigger than he's listed. He comes up aggressively against the run. He'll go low on the running back. But what really stood out in the minicamp and the OTAs is that Deshaun Jameson was consistently around the football. So, I mean, I think Jameson, and I've already on record as saying, I guarantee you he's going to make the roster. There's a lot of people who've never even heard of this guy yet. And yet Deshaun Jameson, who wears number 49, you can check him out this summer in training camp. He's a baller. He's a real player. Then you got Ambry Thomas, and I thought Ambry Thomas might be on the outside looking in, but if Luter is on the PUP list for any extended period of time, let's say beyond the end of the preseason, that could very much benefit Ambry Thomas's ability and his bid to make the roster. And then there's also Quantrez Knight, who played at UCLA. He wears 43. I kind of like Quantrez a little bit more as a safety than as a corner, but they list him at corner, and I'm sure he didn't play a lot in the offseason because of an injury, but I expect Quantrez to show up this summer and really look significantly better than he did a year ago. So you got Quantrez in this mix. You also have Miles Hartsfield. You know, the one thing Steve Wilkes said about Hartsfield is he likes the fact that Hartsfield knows his scheme and can help teach it to others as far as the nuances of playing defensive back in this scheme for Steve Wilkes. So that, so you got Lenore, Mooney Ward, Isaiah Oliver. Those are 3. Then you got Hartfield, Womack, and Ambry Thomas. That's 6. So then you got Quantrez Knight would be 7. Darrell Luter Jr. would be 8. So they do have good depth there. You got Deshaun Jameson, who's really kind of showed a lot already early. But you don't want to lose top corners because they're impossible to replace. And Luter, I was really excited about because not only does he have good size at 5'11", roughly 6 feet, 190 pounds, but you're also talking about a very mature player, a guy who's played a lot of football, a guy who's had a lot of success, and a guy who's just very confident, and he's got really, really long arms to jam you at the line of scrimmage and to kind of reroute you. And I think Luter, who when you do see him on the field, he wears number 28. I think Luter is going to be a major player for the Niners in the secondary. So what does this do to the 49ers this year? I don't know. I'm not sure because we don't know how long Darrell Luter Jr. will be out. But the old coach used to say the key to pass coverage is pass coverage. In other words, there ain't no key to pass coverage. You got to have players. And Darrell Luter Jr. is just that. He's an outstanding young player. And unfortunately, for some period of time, the 49ers are not going to have him. All right, hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks to Pig and a Pickle for being the title sponsor of The Krug Show. And thanks to all you guys for supporting The Krug Show on YouTube.